During your visit to the center, be sure to take a walk to the massive bronze sculpture of Buffalo Bill, located northwest of the Whitney Western Art Museum. The sculpture is not only a memorial to the great showman, but also the cornerstone of the Whitney's collection. This giant, named Buffalo Bill the Scout, was created in the 1920s by Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, sculptor, New York socialite and heiress, philanthropist, and as one local put it in 1935, Cody, Wyoming's fairy godmother. Learning more about Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney offers us insight not only into the art world of the early 20th century, but also into the history of the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. Gertrude Vanderbilt was born January 9, 1875, as the eldest living daughter of the eldest son in America's richest family. Gertrude's great-grandfather Cornelius had built the family fortune from the ground up, investing in shipping and railroads. However, by the time Gertrude was a young woman, the energy and risk-taking of Cornelius I was, for the most part, no longer required for the tame social service expected of a family with such wealth, especially not of its women. Instead, Gertrude's position in the upper echelons of society came with a full agenda, endless social outings, a long list of suitors, and an expectation of being conventional in all things. Gertrude, although benefiting from her immense privilege and wealth, would rail her entire life against the restraints of convention and struggle to carve out her own definition of success. Gertrude began writing at a young age, and thousands of pages of surviving journals provide a window into her world.
I cannot remember when I first realized who I was. At any rate, when I was 11, I knew that there were lots of things I could not do simply because I was Miss Vanderbilt. I longed to be someone else, to be liked only for myself, to live quietly and happily without the burden that goes with riches.
In spite of her struggles, Gertrude recognized the advantages of her fortune and would conform to expectation at many points in her life. In 1896, when she was 21 years old, Gertrude married Harry Payne Whitney. Both her journals and the letters she saved from Harry suggest genuine affection on both their parts, but the match was not without its social and financial benefits. Harry was 3 years older than Gertrude, and a more than acceptable suitor. The Whitney family had a long lineage of wealth and prestige. It was of course assumed by friends and relatives that after their marriage, Gertrude would be destined for a career as a society wife, rearing a proper family and graciously entertaining. Within little more than 2 years, Gertrude had given birth to her first 2 children, Flora and Cornelius. Unsurprisingly, her journals are nearly non-existent for the next few years. After their marriage, Harry quickly began settling into the life of sport and leisure expected of men in his class. But the restrictions of society, in addition to those of motherhood, were painful for Gertrude. She was not fulfilled by the endless dinner parties and social gossip. She longed for purpose. After only a few months of social events, any magic they once held is beginning to ebb. Instead, Gertrude began to seek her magic elsewhere, namely art.
I wanted to work. I was not very happy or satisfied in my life. The more I tried to forget myself in my life, the less I succeeded in doing so. I found myself looking into a future that held neither pleasure nor satisfaction. I had always drawn and painted a little. Now I wanted to try modeling.
By 1900, she has decided she wants to pursue it seriously, professionally, and on a large scale. She began studying under Hendrik Andersen, an established artist.
I remember how often he destroyed some misshapen limb I had constructed, telling me how unworthy it was of my possibilities. And though I wept, I always came back with faith in my own capacity.
Gertrude's first major commission, Aspiration, was completed in time to be selected for the 1901 Pan American Exposition in New York. She would continue to work to perfect her art, seeking out new teachers, studying anatomy, and making numerous sculptural works, both on small and monumental scales. During trips to Europe, she was inspired by works of the greats and refined her techniques. Gertrude defies easy stereotypes as an artist. Of course, with her wealth, she was not dependent on the sale of her art as so many of her contemporaries were, and she could afford to have sculptures cast in bronze, even without patronage. But her wealth and family status also presented challenges. Afraid of being labeled a hobbyist or just a socialite, Gertrude began her art career using false names. In addition to animosity from the art world, Gertrude lacked support from her family, especially and perhaps most painfully from Harry.
Never expect Harry to take your work seriously. It never has made any difference to him that I feel as I do about art, and it never will, except as a source of annoyance.
As she builds her career in the arts, Gertrude continues to struggle with convention. At one point, she describes herself as
a misfit, quite frankly square, in a world that is quite certainly round. But it is better to be the real thing in the wrong place than a bad imitation.
She is also heavily criticized for the decisions she makes regarding the sale of her work. If she charges for commissions, she's blamed with taking away business from artists who need the money. If she donates work, it is said she's undercutting the market value of others' work. Perhaps as an answer to this, by 1904, Gertrude had begun investing a huge portion of her time and energy, not to mention money, in the patronage of other artists. This will become her most vibrant legacy, a great supporter of American art. In 1908, Gertrude took her children to one of Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows, where the whole family was enamored by the spectacle, particularly young Cornelius, who would remember the experience years later. Gertrude, too, was impressed by William Cody as a symbol of the American West. These impressions would go on to play a major role in both Gertrude's and the town of Cody's futures. By 1910, Gertrude was exhibiting her work publicly and under her own name. She had work shown at the National Academy of Design, accepted at the Paris Salon, and won a bronze medal at the 1915 San Francisco exhibition for her work Aztec Fountain. Her first solo show occurred in New York City in 1916. During World War I, Gertrude dedicated her time and money to various relief efforts, establishing and maintaining a hospital for wounded soldiers in France. While at the hospital, Gertrude made drawings of soldiers, which became plans for future memorials. Her sensitive and honest approach to depicting scenes of war became some of her best-known work. When William Buffalo Bill Cody died in 1917, people began looking for a way to memorialize the American symbol of the West. Eventually, the idea took the form of a sculpture. Cody's niece, Mary Jester Allen, who was living in New York at the time, reached out to Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who eagerly accepted the commission. Other prominent female sculptors at the time had already made names for themselves with impressive equestrian sculptures, and Gertrude was eager to join their ranks. She immersed herself in the project by reading Buffalo Bill's autobiography and other stories of the West. She studied equestrian sculpture and photographs of Cody and other cowboys. Her proposal did receive a great deal of criticism, but after incorporating suggestions from the Memorial Association and studying a live model and horse, shipped to New York especially for the project, Gertrude's maquette was approved. In 1922, Gertrude took a train to Wyoming to inspect the potential site for the sculpture, but decided she disliked the spot. Instead, she purchased 40 acres nearby, in view of the Shoshone Canyon, and hired an architect to build the stone base for her sculpture out of locally sourced material. This was the only time Gertrude visited Cody, but her impact on the town is hard to overstate. The Scout arrived by train in 1924, and somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 people attended the unveiling on the 4th of July. Gertrude did not attend, but traveled to France as her focus shifted to other commissions. Even as her own sculpture career progressed, Gertrude continued investing in other artists and building her collection of American art. In 1931, after nearly 25 years of dreaming of such a place, Gertrude's New York Studio Gallery took its final form as the famous Whitney Museum of American Art. Although Gertrude was an accomplished sculptor in her own right, New York's Whitney Museum is truly Gertrude's greatest legacy. Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney died in 1942 of a heart condition. Her great love of art and enormous generosity live on in her sculptures, the Whitney Museum in New York, and of course, in the Whitney Western Art Museum in Cody, Wyoming. The 40 acres she purchased here went on to become the site not only for the Scout, but eventually the entire Buffalo Bill Center of the West. Gertrude's monument to Buffalo Bill, along with the museum, have served as landmarks in the town of Cody and the Yellowstone region for decades, and will continue to do so for many more. Gertrude's story is one of pure drive to create, to add to the world. She benefited from her social station, but she also overcame numerous doubts about her gender, her ability, and her dedication. To discount her would be a disservice to the history of American art, and to the spirit of all those who are driven to create.